Stay quiet and follow me." The words were so calm that the billionaire almost missed them over the hum of traffic and the hiss of rain on the pavement. Under the glow of a gas station sign on the edge of downtown Chicago, an 11-year-old black girl stood with her small hands tucked into the pockets of a faded denim jacket, looking up at him with steady eyes. Her name was Tia, and even in the half-light, she did not look afraid. She looked certain. Behind her, the night seemed ordinary at first glance. An empty lot, a convenience store, a row of parked cars shining with rain. But Tia was already moving, stepping backward once, then gesturing for him to come closer. The billionaire, Marcus Bell, had just stepped out of his black SUV to answer a call when he noticed the girl staring straight at the building across the street. She did not point. She did not whisper again. She only tilted her head, as if listening for something no one else could hear. Marcus frowned. At his side, his driver was still in the car, and the security detail had not yet caught up after getting stuck at the light a block away. "Young lady," Marcus said, lowering his voice, "where are your parents?" Tia did not answer. Instead, she reached out, touched the sleeve of his coat for half a second, and led him toward the shadow of a brick wall near the side entrance of the store. Her steps were quick but careful, like she already knew every crack in the sidewalk. Marcus followed because something in her voice had not sounded like a child playing a game. It had sounded like a warning. They had barely taken 3 steps when Tia stopped again and looked toward the alley beside the building. The rain made everything glisten. The metal dumpster, the wet pavement, the silver edge of a loading dock ramp. Then Marcus saw it too, a faint light blinking near the back door, hidden under a loose strip of tape. He could not make out what it was from where he stood, but Tia's face tightened, and that was enough to make him go still. "Don't move," she said softly. "Just stay quiet." Marcus looked at her, then at the alley, then back at the child who had somehow become the calmest person in the dark. A distant car passed. Somewhere, a store door chimed. Tia took one more step forward, and this time Marcus noticed the small fabric bracelet on her wrist, frayed at the edges, with 2 tiny silver beads that caught the light whenever she moved. She was searching the alley with the focus of a detective, not a little girl. Marcus's hand drifted toward his phone, but before he could unlock it, Tia spoke again, even lower this time. "If they hear us now, they'll run." Marcus did not move. The rain kept tapping against the awning above the gas station, and the neon sign buzzed softly in the dark. Tia stayed just ahead of him, her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed on the alley as if she could see through the shadows themselves. "There," she whispered. Marcus followed the line of her finger and noticed the back door of the building across the lot. It was cracked open just enough to spill a thin bar of yellow light onto the wet concrete. Nothing about it looked normal, and that was exactly what made Marcus feel uneasy. He lowered his voice. "Tia, what are we looking at?" She glanced at him once, then back to the doorway. "Something they were not supposed to leave behind," she said. Her tone was steady, but there was a tightness in it now, a kind of urgency that made Marcus's chest tighten too. He looked again and saw a dark shape near the threshold, a plastic case no bigger than a lunchbox, half hidden by a stack of empty crates. His phone was still in his hand, but he did not raise it. Tia had not told him to call anyone yet. She had told him to stay quiet. So he listened. A truck rolled past on the street, and headlights washed over the alley for one brief second. In that flash, Marcus saw Tia's frayed bracelet again, the silver beads catching the light as her fingers curled around the edge of her jacket. She was only 11, yet she stood there with the stillness of someone who had already thought through the next 10 steps. "How did you know?" he asked under his breath. Tia did not answer right away. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded receipt, the paper damp at the edges, then handed it to him without a word. Marcus unfolded it and saw a delivery stamp, a time, and a name he recognized from his own company. His expression changed at once. The alley, the open door, the hidden case, the receipt, everything suddenly fit together in a way that made his stomach turn. Tia watched his face carefully. "You were meant to walk through here alone," she said. "They wanted you close to the door before you noticed." Marcus felt the air grow heavier around him. He took one slow breath and looked at the child in front of him as if seeing her for the first time. She was not lost. She was not confused. She had been waiting for the moment when he would understand. From deeper inside the building, there came the faint sound of a lock clicking shut. Tia's head lifted at once. "Now," she said, and for the first time, Marcus heard something beneath her calm voice. Not fear. Focus. Then she stepped backward into the rain and motioned for him to follow. Marcus followed Tia across the rain-slick lot, his shoes splashing softly in the shallow water as the neon glow from the station stretched in broken lines behind them. The night felt wider now, colder too, as if the whole city had leaned away from the alley and was waiting to see what would happen next. Tia moved with a quiet certainty that did not belong to an 11-year-old child. She checked every corner before crossing, then slipped behind a rusted delivery van and pointed toward a narrow service path lined with stacked crates. Marcus could hear his own breathing, slow and shallow, while somewhere beyond the brick wall a metal door opened and closed again. Tia paused near a flickering security light and looked back at him. "They are moving things through the side entrance," she said. "That is why they wanted you here after dark." Marcus stared at her, the shape of her words settling into place inside him. The receipt from the alley, the cracked door, the hidden case. It was no accident. It was a setup designed to make him step into the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked at the child beside him and felt a hard, cold gratitude rise in his chest. "How did you know?" he asked. Tia did not answer right away. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small folded note, worn soft from being opened again and again. She held it between two fingers. "My brother used to work here," she said. "He told me which door they never locked the same way twice. He also told me that if anything looked strange, I should not wait for a grown-up who might be too late." Her voice stayed calm, but something behind it had shifted. Marcus could hear the weight of that memory in every word. Before he could respond, a low engine rolled somewhere to their right. Both of them turned. A dark sedan had pulled halfway behind the building, its lights off, its engine still humming. Two men stepped out, one carrying a flashlight, the other speaking into a phone in a hurried whisper. Tia pressed her hand lightly against Marcus's sleeve and pulled him back into the shadow of the crates. "Do not let them see you yet," she said. Marcus obeyed without thinking. He had spent most of his life giving orders, signing papers, making rooms go quiet when he entered them. But tonight, under broken light and rain, the smartest person in the dark was the little girl beside him. The men near the sedan turned toward the service path, and one of them lifted the flashlight beam across the lot. It skimmed over the wet pavement, over the van, over the crates, then stopped just short of where Marcus and Tia were hiding. Tia stayed still, not tense, not afraid, just steady. Then, in the softest voice, she said, "If they keep talking, we can hear what they are planning." Marcus leaned closer, listening as the men argued in quick, clipped phrases about a shipment, a missing folder, and a schedule that had to be changed before morning. Every word sharpened the truth. This was not a random danger. This was business. His business. And someone inside his own company had arranged it, so he would never see the whole picture until it was too late. The realization hit him like cold air in the lungs. He looked at Tia again, at the tiny, determined set of her face, and understood something deeper than fear. She had not simply saved him from one bad step into the dark. She had led him straight toward the truth. A moment later, Tia touched the watch on his wrist and whispered, "Now you need to see the rest." Then she stepped out from behind the crates with her chin lifted and motioned for him to follow. Marcus stayed where Tia pointed him, half hidden behind the rusted delivery van while the rain softened to a steady mist over the loading lot. The city lights blurred across the wet pavement, turning every puddle into a broken mirror. Ahead, the side door of the warehouse stood open just enough for a strip of pale light to spill onto the concrete, and voices drifted out in low, hurried pieces. Tia watched that doorway with the same calm she had shown all night, one small hand resting near the watch on Marcus's wrist as if she was keeping him anchored to the moment. Then she took one careful step forward and lifted her chin. "Do not go in yet," she whispered. "Wait until they move the box with the blue tape." Marcus frowned, but he did not interrupt. Inside the building, a crate scraped across the floor, followed by the quick shuffle of shoes and the sharp click of a laptop being closed. Tia's eyes narrowed. "There," she said softly. "That is the one they are trying to hide." Marcus leaned just enough to see a pair of men crossing the doorway with their shoulders tight and their faces turned away from the light. One carried a folder. The other held a clipboard pressed close to his chest. Neither looked like a man who expected to be caught. Tia did not smile, but something in her expression changed, as if a final piece had fallen into place. She reached into the front pocket of her faded jacket and pulled out a folded receipt, smooth with rain and carefully preserved. "I found this near the alley earlier," she said. "It has the truck number and a timestamp. They did not notice I took it." Marcus took the paper with 2 fingers, stunned by how much danger had been resting in such a small thing. He studied the numbers, then looked back toward the warehouse, and his jaw tightened when he recognized the route. The shipment was tied to one of his own company facilities, one that had passed inspection 3 days ago. That meant someone had cleaned everything up before the paperwork ever reached his desk. Tia saw the shift in his face and nodded once, as if she had expected exactly that reaction. "They wanted you to leave before you learned anything," she said. "So I made sure you did not." A long silence followed, not empty, but heavy with truth. Marcus looked at the little girl beside him, her braids damp at the ends, her sneakers muddy, her whole body steady in the rain. She had not waited for an adult to decide what mattered. She had seen the problem, measured the risk, and acted. Then the warehouse door opened wider, and a man inside called out for the others to hurry. Tia slipped her hand into Marcus's sleeve and pulled him back one step. "Now," she said, almost like a command. "You have enough to call the police." Marcus did not move for a second, because he understood that this was no longer only about one bad night or one hidden deal. It was about a child who had trusted her own eyes more than every polished excuse around her. He lowered his phone, readying the call, and glanced at her again. In the glow from the warehouse, Tia looked small and unshakably brave. Marcus had been rescued, yes, but the deeper truth was harder to ignore. She had also handed him the courage to finally face what his money and power had failed to protect. When he finally pressed the screen, Tia stayed beside him in the rain, quiet as a shadow and strong as a promise. By the time the first gray light slipped over the gas station roof, Marcus had already made the call and stayed on the line until the officers confirmed they were on the way. Tia stood beside him under the awning, her small hands wrapped around a paper cup of water the clerk had handed her from behind the counter. She was no longer scanning the alley. Now she was watching the road, calm and still, as if she had already carried the night as far as it needed to go. When the first patrol car turned into the lot, its headlights washed over the wet pavement and caught the silver edges of the rain. Marcus lowered his phone and looked at Tia with a kind of silence that felt different from before. It was not confusion now. It was respect. An officer stepped out, listened fast, and followed Marcus toward the warehouse while another stayed near the door. Tia remained where she was told, but her eyes kept moving, taking in every detail the way some children collect postcards or coins. A few minutes later, the officers returned with a small group of workers and a folder of documents sealed inside a plastic sleeve. One of the men in uniform gave Marcus a short nod that said enough had been found to confirm what Tia had already sensed. The people inside the warehouse had been hiding more than missing inventory. They had been using the storm, the darkness, and Marcus's own kindness to keep the whole thing quiet. Marcus stared at the folder, then at the girl beside him, and for the first time that night he seemed to understand how close he had come to trusting the wrong voices. Tia did not smile like she had won something. She only lifted her chin a little and asked, "Did you see it now?" The question was gentle, but it landed with the weight of truth. Marcus exhaled slowly and knelt so they were eye to eye. "I saw it," he said. "Because you did." Tia's fingers tightened once around the paper cup, and then she glanced toward the road, where the morning light was finally brightening the wet asphalt. Marcus asked her why she had been at the station so late, why she had stepped into danger instead of running home, why she had known exactly where to look. For a moment, she was quiet. Then she reached into the pocket of her faded jacket and pulled out a folded photograph, worn soft at the edges. It showed a younger man standing beside a woman at a charity clinic years earlier. Marcus recognized the event at once. The clinic had opened after a winter storm, and his foundation had funded the first week of supplies. Tia touched the picture lightly and said that her mother had once worked there before getting sick. She had remembered Marcus because he had paid for medicine without asking for anything back. "My mama said people like that still matter," she said. "So when I saw those men watching you, I followed." The words settled over the lot like sunlight breaking through clouds. Marcus looked at the photograph again, then back at her, and something in his face changed completely. He took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, not as a gesture of pity, but as a promise that she would not be overlooked again. By the time the tow truck arrived and the officers finished their notes, the gas station was awake with morning noise. Yet in the middle of all that ordinary sound, one thing felt new. A billionaire had been rescued by an 11-year-old girl, and what she gave him was bigger than safety. She gave him the chance to see clearly. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus understood that true strength was not about standing above anyone. It was about listening when the smallest voice told the truth. By the time the first light had fully settled over the gas station, the entire place felt different. The rain had eased into a thin silver mist, and the humming neon sign no longer looked harsh against the morning sky. Marcus stood near the edge of the lot with his phone still in his hand. Listening to the steady voice on the other end confirmed that officers were already on their way. Tia remained beside him under the awning, her small shoulders squared and her expression calm, as if the longest night of her life had only made her stand straighter. She watched the road instead of the doorway, watching for movement, watching for proof that the danger had not been imagined. Then a cruiser turned onto the street, its headlights sweeping across the wet pavement. Marcus exhaled slowly, and only then did he realize how tightly he had been holding his breath. When the officer stepped out, Tia did not move behind Marcus or hide her face. She lifted her chin, answered their questions clearly, and pointed toward the alley with the same steady certainty she had carried all night. Marcus listened as she explained what she had seen, how the men had been watching him, how she had followed them without making a sound, and how she had waited until she was sure enough to speak. There was no drama in her voice, only truth. One of the officers glanced at Marcus, then at the girl standing in the damp morning light, and even he seemed to understand that something rare had happened here. A child had noticed what grown people had missed. After the first notes were taken and the officers moved toward the alley, Marcus looked down at Tia and noticed the tiredness she had been refusing to show. Her shoes were wet through. Her braid had come loose at one end. Yet she still stood there with her hands folded neatly in front of her, as if her job was not finished until every detail had been seen. Marcus lowered himself beside her, so they were eye to eye. "You should have run," he said quietly. Tia shook her head once. "Then you would have stayed in the dark," she replied. The answer landed harder than anything else that morning. It was not the kind of sentence adults expected from a child, and that was exactly why it changed him. Marcus looked toward the alley again, then back at her, and for the first time he understood that she had not just saved him from what was hidden there. She had saved him from the way he had been living before it. He had spent years believing money could protect him from every threat, every betrayal, every blind corner in a city that always seemed one step ahead. But standing there now, with rain on his coat and a child's steady gaze in front of him, he saw the truth more clearly than ever. Safety was not only locks and guards and cameras. Sometimes safety was a voice small enough to be ignored and brave enough to speak anyway. The tow truck arrived a few minutes later, and one of the officers began asking about the car he had left near the pumps, but Marcus barely heard him. His attention stayed on Tia, on the way she kept glancing toward the road, as if she had places to be and reasons to keep moving. Then he remembered the old photo she had shown him, and the cracked edge of the paper, and the way she had spoken about her mother with such careful respect. "You said your mama taught you to notice people who need help," Marcus said. Tia nodded. "She said the world gets louder when people forget to look." Marcus felt that line settle deep in him. He reached into his wallet, took out a card, and then stopped before handing it to her. It felt too small for what she had done, too simple for the debt he already owed. Instead, he folded it back away and chose his words with care. "Then I am going to remember that for the rest of my life," he said. Tia looked up at him, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. It was quick and shy, but it changed the air between them. The kind of smile that did not ask for anything. The kind that told the truth all by itself. As the sun climbed higher, Marcus watched the light touch the wet pavement and turn it gold. The danger was over, but the lesson was only beginning. He had been rescued by an 11-year-old girl, and in the quiet aftermath of that truth, he understood something he would never forget. The smallest person in the room can carry the clearest light. By the time the sun had climbed higher, the gas station no longer felt like the same place that had held its breath in the dark. The wet pavement still shone with thin silver lines, but now the morning light made everything look softer, almost ordinary. Marcus stood near the curb with his sleeves rolled once at the forearms, a little tired, a little stunned, and still trying to understand how an 11-year-old girl had seen what he had missed. Tia was a few steps away, under the awning, her backpack resting against one leg. She watched him with the calm of someone who had already said what needed saying and did not need applause for it. A patrol car rolled slowly into the lot, then another. The officers stepped out with careful eyes, and Marcus gave them a short nod before pointing toward the side entrance Tia had noticed earlier. He spoke in a steady voice, not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough for everyone to hear. Check the back room first. Tia did not move, but her gaze followed every step. One officer returned a moment later holding a small bundle wrapped in a dish towel, and the look on his face changed everything. It was not the look of surprise anymore. It was confirmation. Marcus let out a slow breath and closed his eyes for one brief second. He had spent years trusting alarms, cameras, guards, and contracts, but none of that had mattered until a child told him to stay quiet and follow her. When he opened his eyes again, he turned toward Tia. "You knew exactly where to lead me," he said. She lifted one shoulder in a small shrug, as if the answer was simple. "People always leave clues," she said. "Most grown-ups just do not look long enough." That made one of the officers glance at her with new respect, and Marcus almost smiled. Almost. Instead, his face softened in a way that made him look younger, less like the man who owned half the block and more like someone who had been shaken awake. He stepped closer, then stopped at a respectful distance. "I want to thank you properly," he said. "You do not have to do that," Tia replied. "I already helped." There was no pride in her voice, only truth. Marcus looked down at the mud on his shoes, then back at her. "Then let me say it the right way," he said. "You did more than help. You protected me." The words seemed to land quietly between them, heavier than money and warmer than any gift. Tia looked away for a moment, toward the road where the morning traffic was starting to build. The rain had stopped now, and the world smelled clean again, like asphalt, coffee, and the faint breath of wet grass from the ditch beyond the pumps. Marcus followed her gaze and then made a decision so fast it surprised even him. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his personal phone, and made a call to his driver. "Bring the car around," he said. Then, after a pause, "and send someone to the office. I am not coming in yet." When he ended the call, he crouched slightly so he could meet Tia at eye level, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Tia hesitated just long enough to be honest. "A little." Marcus nodded once. "Then we are fixing that first." She studied him for a second, as if checking whether the promise was real. Then she gave the smallest nod in return. As they waited beside the awning, the first warm beam of sun touched Tia's face, catching the edges of her braids and turning the damp strands to gold. Marcus saw it and felt something settle inside him. Something he had not known was broken until that morning. He had been saved before the day had even begun, and the person who saved him had asked for nothing except that he listen. That was the part he would carry the longest. Not the fear, not the officers, not even the discovery in the back room. It was the quiet courage of a little girl standing in the rain, refusing to let a powerful man walk past the truth. By late morning, the station had filled with the ordinary sounds of a place trying to start over. A door chime rang every time someone came in for coffee. A delivery truck rattled past the pumps. Somewhere behind the counter, a radio played low and steady, the kind of song that made the morning feel less heavy than it had an hour before. Marcus stood near the window with a paper cup in one hand and his phone in the other, watching the road while Tia sat at a small table with her backpack hugged to her chest. He had already sent 2 messages, made 1 call, and asked one of his security team to quietly check the area around the station again. Nothing about it felt dramatic now. It felt careful. It felt necessary. Tia watched him from across the room, her braids still damp at the ends, her shoes drying beside the heater vent. When Marcus looked over, she did not smile right away. She just lifted her chin a little, as if to ask whether he had done what he said he would do. He nodded once. That seemed to be enough. A few minutes later, the station manager came out from the back office with a manila envelope and a nervous expression. He explained that one of the suppliers had tried to push through a delivery order that did not match the normal records. Marcus listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening only once. Then he glanced at Tia, who had gone still in her seat the moment she heard the word records. She had been right about more than danger. She had recognized the pattern before anyone else had bothered to look closely. Marcus did not ask her to repeat anything. He simply said her name softly, like a promise that he was paying attention now. Tia stood up and walked toward him with the quiet seriousness of someone much older than 11. "That is why they wanted you to leave," she said. Marcus exhaled slowly, looking toward the back hallway, then back at her. "You knew," he said. Tia shook her head. "I guessed." The honesty in her voice made him pause. He had spent years around people who wrapped every sentence in polish, but this child offered truth without decoration. He crouched down just enough to be near her eye line again. "That still counts," he said. "And it saved me." For a second, Tia looked away, embarrassed by praise she had not asked for. Then she pointed toward the window. "There were footprints by the side door," she said, "and the lock was not sitting right." Marcus followed her gaze. In the daylight, the details were smaller, easier to miss, but they were still there if someone knew how to look. He realized then that Tia had not only warned him. She had observed, connected, and acted when adults with expensive suits had walked past the same clues. The thought sat heavily in his chest, but not in a painful way. More like a truth finally finding its place. He straightened and slipped his phone into his pocket. "Come with me," he said. Tia hesitated, eyes narrowing with caution. He added, "Only if you want to." That made her consider him differently. Not softer, just safer. She nodded once, and together they crossed the lot toward his black SUV. The morning light had grown warmer now, glinting off the wet pavement and turning the station windows bright. Marcus opened the door for her, then waited until she climbed in before shutting it gently. As he stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the roof, he understood that the day had not simply been about surviving a threat. It had been about being interrupted by courage. About a little girl who saw what mattered before he did. About the kind of wisdom that does not arrive with age or wealth, but with attention. And as the SUV pulled away from the station, Marcus looked at the small figure beside him and knew that whatever came next, he would never again mistake silence for safety. By the time the SUV reached the center of town, the rain had thinned to a mist that hovered above the sidewalks and softened the edges of everything it touched. Marcus kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting near the cup holder, where Tia had placed the folded strip of paper she had carried from the station. He had already read the note twice. It was not long, just an address, a name, and one careful line in a child's handwriting that said, "He will be there if you go now." Marcus had not asked how she knew. He could feel, in the quiet way she sat beside him, that the answer would not come easily. So he drove. They turned off the main road and into a neighborhood of older brick buildings, narrow porches, and trees that leaned over the street like they were trying to listen. Tia pointed once, and Marcus slowed. A white van sat crooked near the curb ahead, its side door open, one tire flattened and shining with rain. The engine was off. Everything about it looked wrong in a way that made the air feel heavier. Marcus parked half a block away, and before he could speak, Tia was already watching the van with a stillness that looked far older than 11. "That is where he would have gone," she said softly. Marcus looked at her. "You knew this place?" She shook her head. "Not the place. The pattern." That answer settled in him like a stone. He turned toward the van again, then back to her. "You said stay quiet." "Because sound would have made him look," she replied. "And if he looked too soon, he would have moved." Marcus let out a slow breath. The reason she had pulled him into that alley behind the station was beginning to unfold piece by piece, and each piece made him respect her more. There was a movement inside the van. Not much, just enough for both of them to notice. Marcus reached for his phone, but Tia touched his wrist, light as a warning feather. "Wait," she whispered. "There is someone else." He froze. In the mirror of the van window, a figure crossed behind the open door and disappeared into the building beside it, carrying something long and dark under one arm. Marcus's jaw tightened. He did not need to guess anymore. This was not a random stop. This was a setup. Tia had seen it before he did. She slid lower in her seat, peering through the glass, her braids brushing her shoulders. "He is inside," she said. "If you call too early, they will know." Marcus looked from the van to the building, then to the girl who had already done the math for him. "Then what do we do?" Tia lifted her eyes, steady and clear. "We make them think no one saw." He nearly smiled, but the moment was too sharp for that. Instead, he took out his phone and typed a text to a private security contact he trusted more than anyone else in his world. One hand, one message, no drama. Tia watched him with a serious little nod, as if confirming that he had finally learned how to listen. Minutes passed slowly. A delivery truck rolled by. A woman in a red coat hurried past with groceries held tight to her chest. The neighborhood kept moving, unaware of the danger hiding behind a quiet door. Then Marcus saw it. A flash of movement in the second-floor window of the building, and the curtain shifted just enough to reveal a face. He went still. "There," Tia said. "That is why I brought you." Marcus looked at her, stunned not by fear but by the weight of trust in her voice. She had not dragged him here to be saved. She had brought him because she knew he had the power to help make the truth matter. And in that small, rainy street, with the windshield fogging between them and the world holding its breath, Marcus understood that her courage had never been loud. It had been precise. He checked the side mirror, then the rear view. "Stay in the car," he said. Tia shook her head once. "No, you will need me to remember details." He stared at her. She was not asking permission. She was offering a gift. So he gave her a short nod and stepped out into the mist. The wet pavement reflected the gray sky as he moved toward the building, calm on the outside and alert in every muscle. Behind him, in the passenger seat, Tia sat upright like a small sentinel, ready to point out what everyone else had missed. And as Marcus closed the car door, he realized that the day had changed again. He was no longer the man tracking a problem. He was the man following a child who had already found the truth.